بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم أخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمنا بنور الفهم وافتح علينا بمعرفة العلم وسهل أخلاقنا بالحلم واجعلنا ممن يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه. My dear respected brothers and sisters and organizers of this great important event in Kerala, India, that is celebrating the Quran and the importance of its preservation, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward, to bless, and to provide relief to the ummah and to assist those people that are suffering around the world. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase those that have organized this important event, to increase them in status and elevation in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and provide them opportunity to do more good. My dear respected brothers and sisters, the topic that I have chosen today is the importance of the Quran opposing the colonial powers and its impact that it's had on our community. It is important for us as Muslims to remember, number one, the importance of the Quran in our lives. Number two, the impact it will have when we leave the Quran. And number three, what happens after that. To start, I would like to focus on the importance of the colonial era and what it has had an impact in our lives. We know that colonization happened between the 17th century until the 21st century. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to rid the colonial influences of the world, particularly the occupation that is happening in Palestine today. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to ease the difficulties and the challenges of the people of Gaza and to end the occupation and this colonial, imperial powers that have influenced and unfortunately continue to support the occupation of Palestine and Masjid al-Aqsa. My dear respected brothers and sisters, the colonial powers since the 17th century have gone into many different lands, from Southern America to India, to the African nations, towards the Eastern Asian countries and Southeast Asia. We know that these colonial powers went in for the sake of powering their own interests and their own economic benefit, and not the economic benefit or the benefit of the local communities. And during this time, regardless of your religion, regardless of who you were, people of the indigenous communities were displaced. They were disregarded, and there was no opportunity for them for progression in this colonial imperial system. We know that the Muslims, wherever they were, they posed a strong, important effect. And we know this through what happened in India, what happened in Egypt, what happened in Senegal, what happened in Indonesia. All of these places showed a strong resistance. Until today, we know that Islam, the strongest religion, the strongest deen, till today poses a strong threat to these people and colonial powers. We know that in Indonesia, the awliya, Sunan Bunan, the awliya that were there, they were unable to captive them, even though they were taken to South Africa, Cape Town. We know that the awliya over there, according to European historians, when they were buried, these awliya, lights were coming from the mountains, showing the way for lost people. And when lost people at sea would follow those lights back to the shore, they would look for where the light was coming from, and it would lead to the qubur of these awliya. We also know that in Egypt, when there was strife, when there was difficulty, when there was hardship during the British rule, it was the Muslims in Egypt that stood strong together. It is important for us to understand that the British rule, when they wanted to get rid of Islam in Egypt, they monitored the behaviors of the Muslims, and one day when it was time for Fajr Salah, a man, he went outside and he started to look at the water supply, and the water supply was full of ice. He took a rock and he cracked the ice to make his wudu to get ready for Fajr. This journalist, observing this, looked at the situation and says, as long as these people hold on to their deen, these people will never be able to be occupied. We also know, closer to home in India, when the British mutiny happened, when the British occupation in India was happening, they wanted to get hold of the Muslim lands. The one important thing that did not allow them to have a stronghold was the ability of the Muslims to hold strong onto the Quran. And this is a very big lesson for us, holding on to the Quran. So when a British general admiral came and he started to bring all the Qurans from the villages, in the Indian villages, they took all the Qurans and they put it in the center of the village. The mullah of that village asked, what are you trying to do? And he said, we are trying to burn the Quran, the source of all of these problems. The mullah called his students. All of his students came together in a circle, and he said, you read from Surah Al-Kahf, you read from Surah Taha, you read from Surah Al-Kahf, you read from Surah Al-Qamar. All of them started reading, and then he turned to the administrator and he said, the Quran is not written in books, it is inside the heart, it is preserved in the heart. And that is why it was so hard for them to understand this. So it is important for us to understand that the Quran was the source of keeping our community together. What happens when we stray away from the Quran? And there are, number two, it is important for us to understand there are constant attempts for us to stray away from the Quran, stray away from the understanding of the Quran and our connection with the Quran. It is important for us to always reconnect with the Quran. The Quran, according to the scholars, as long as you are closer to the Quran will be close to you. As soon as you stray away from the Quran will be far away from you. It is important that you have a strong relationship with the Quran, your ability to connect with the Quran. There is a story from our colonial past in Egypt where they tried to change the understanding, our understanding of the Quran, and the way that they did it is through the British. They tried to reprint the Quran in as a present, as a gift to the Egyptian people. So when they printed all of these mushafs and they presented it back to the people, they were very wary of this. It was only after a blind Egyptian Shaikh that when he was listening, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasul wa ulul amri minkum. They deleted ulul amri minkum, they deleted minkum and left ulul amr. Because as the colonial powers, they wanted to control the Muslims and they wanted to use the scripture, the Islamic scripture, the Quran in itself, to say that we are in power, you are supposed to be subservient according to your Quran. But this Shaykh, this blind Shaykh, because he preserved the Quran in his heart, he was able to pick up the mistake. And he was able to tell them that this is wrong. And when they found out this mistake was prevalent in all of the mushafs that they had, they burnt all of these mushafs, they gathered them together and they burnt them. A lesson for us to remember our relationship with the Quran, and if we stray away from it, if we stray away from the understanding, we will be lost. The last thing is it is important for us to maintain a strong relationship, a strong connection with the Quran. Our youth, they want to know more about the Quran. Our youth, they want the Quran to be more accessible. And we're seeing efforts in our masjids, in our madaris, in our darul ulooms. It's important for us, for them to be able to relate to the Quran in the Arabic language, in their local languages, and be able to make the Quran accessible to other people. Because in the colonial era, there were only a handful of people that used to understand the Quran. We need to make the understanding of the Quran accessible to everyone. And when we are able to preserve the Quran inside our heart, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will enable us to change the situation. And a last thought about our people in Gaza. Many of them are huffaz, many of them are people of the Quran, and we have to pray for them. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easy for them. The most important thing that keeps them going is their iman in Allah and the importance of having hope for a better future. Ala inna nasrullahi qareeb, that Allah's nasr is very soon. And despite all the occupation, despite all the difficulties, it is important for us to have hope in Allah. It is important for us to stay optimistic. And it is important for us to bounce back and to be resilient. The Palestinian people are the most resilient people. It is a lesson for you and me. It is a lesson for us that despite all of the difficulties we are going through, we have not experienced what they are going through. It is important for us to take on their message and to be as strong, to pick ourselves up, to be positive, to be optimistic, just the way that they are. This is a lesson for all of us. They are our examples today, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviate them from their suffering. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين. جزاكم الله خيرا. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all, and we wish you all the best for this conference. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.